Bridges, with your host, Donnie Miller, connecting our community with information about issues and opportunities.
Good Sunday morning and welcome to Bridges. My name is Donnie. The events of the past week, the past months, actually the past several years have given us significant opportunity to reassess the things that are important to us, to talk about family and faith and supporting one another. They've given us lots of opportunity as well for some significant conversation around several important matters. Among those matters is the issue of mental health care and the importance of mental health treatment. And that's what we're talking about today. We have two local experts. You will be interested in hearing what they have to say. With me, I have the honor of having Dr. Janice Woodworth, who is the Clinical Director of Youth and Family Services at Harbor. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you.
Very happy to have you here. Also, William Emmaheiser, did I get that right?
That's correct,
He's
yes.
the Director of Community-Based Treatment at Unison.
Yes, thank you for having us.
I am really, really happy to have you here. I know you both have been consulted quite a bit over the past several weeks, given the tragedy at Newton, but I'd like to talk about it a bit differently today, if that's okay with you. Mm-hmm. I'd like to talk about the whole aspect of mental health care and the way we're approaching mental health treatment in this country. And so let's start there. Why do you think, given the number of instances that we've had that make it very, very clear that mental health care in this country should be of significant importance, that we continue to have it as one of our lower level priorities?
Well, I think mental health services in general, just as a whole, is one of those things that a lot of folks just kind of take for granted and just really don't even think about when it comes to just health care in general. And until there is an incident where there's a tragedy or there is some newsworthy story or what the public would be interested in hearing about or seeing in that, looking at that, I think that we don't really consider mental health services. But I definitely think that probably the biggest reason why mental health is not looked at is the stigma. A lot of times families, the community as a whole, still see mental health as one of those things that is almost like a pariah issue.
I think you're right, and I don't get that. I really don't get that. I mean, there are lots of differences in this world. There are all kinds of things that we have to consider as we move through this life, and we make adjustments for, we pay attention to. Any illness in the world is a difference. It is something that we pay attention to. But with mental illness, for some reason, we have stigmatized it to the point that we make that person with mental illness a danger to himself, a danger to the rest of us, because we force the isolation.
Absolutely.
And
the
reality
is that folks with mental illness are not likely to hurt anyone. In fact,
and
they're
say
most
that again. I don't think people hear that.
Individuals with mental health issues are more likely to hurt themselves than
anybody else. Absolutely.
And unfortunately, the rates of suicide are much higher with individuals with mental health issues than homicide, and it's 3, 5, sometimes research shows up to 10 times more suicides occur rather than homicides.
And they're more likely to be victims of violence themselves. The kids are more likely to be bullied. They're more likely to be victims of street crime, sort of community crime, than they are to be the perpetrators of violence. And that's something is poorly understood.
Yeah.
And I think that the stigma of mental illness, in part, has not been overcome because mental illness is you can't see it, you can't taste it, you can't touch it.
Right.
The stigma that was attached to breast cancer,
right,
20 years ago, in some respects has resolved because it was something that people could deal with. People talked about it and they were willing, to become advocates, for the treatment of breast cancer. That's been more difficult in the mental health community.
You're absolutely right. And I think it's important to know that I am not saying today that there was any sympathy to be found in the Newton, what happened in Newtown. The only sympathy to be found in that incident is with the loss of those children and those families and those adults. those are the people with whom our hearts rest this morning. It is important to understand, though, that we have to look at the genesis of why these things happen if we are going to make a difference. And we've heard President Obama in his most recent announcement regarding his intervention address the need to discuss mental illness and mental health care as part of that initiative. And that's a bit of the conversation. There's a president now making that announcement, and that is part of the conversation that I'm hoping that we have this morning.
Well, I think for some of the perpetrators that have been involved in the shootings, there was some evidence they had participated in mental health treatment at some point in the past. Stigma is one of the things that prevents people from following through on mental health treatment. Mental health treatment oftentimes is difficult to access. Resources are limited. Finances are limited. There's been terrible cuts in mental health services and Medicaid throughout every state. College campus counseling centers have had cuts financially and have difficulty serving, their community, the community of college students. So some of it is resources, some of it is access, and some of it is unwillingness to access the resources that are available.
And the unfortunate piece about that, doctor, is that the statistics show that when there is intervention, properly focused intervention, the outcomes are almost always positive in terms of treatment. Yeah.
And as far as looking at that stigma and some of the ways that we can combat this stigma, it's not only doing shows like this to educate the community, but also, at Unison, one of the things that we've done is that there is such a stigma that's coming into a community mental health office and coming in, and there's a big sign on our building that says Unison Behavioral Health, right? And so one of the things that we have done is really focus especially on children and families, of going out into the community and providing intake services in the home, in the schools, and really wherever the need is for that family. And that decreases that concern or that stigma of coming into an office.
Right.
And we hope that, and we've seen great success in engaging families in the community versus, having them come into the office, although it's always an option. That's one of the ways that we've worked towards decreasing that stigma over the past couple of years.
And I think the trend to home-based services also meets the client where they are, meets the family where they are. And I agree, for kids, because they're nested in their families, we can't address the issues of children without addressing the issues of the family.
Absolutely.
And we've talked about this earlier. I don't know how you can understand what's going on in the family unless you've been to where they live.
The family is.
Exactly.
That's right.
So the trend towards community-based services, I think, is growing, and I think that's going to continue.
I think that's a great idea, though, because it really allows people the opportunity to move slowly and steadily and at their own pace into that treatment process without making it so very public. I mean, you're right. I've been to your building a million times, and you're pretty much announced when you pull up in the parking lot. That's where you are. We still own a lot of that stigma. People who need that treatment understand.
Well, and people stigmatize themselves.
That's what I'm.
People, adults and kids both, who have been diagnosed, labeled with a mental illness, know the baggage that brings with them, and feel less self-esteem. They know they're being treated differently, and begin to develop the sense that there's a reason why they're being treated differently, because there's something wrong with them. When we have families come to Harbor, it's interesting because Toledo is a fairly small community. We oftentimes have people come in and they see people they know. Yes. Sometimes relatives they know. Yes. And you see these adults looking at each other going, they don't know what to do, they don't know what to say. Right. There's some embarrassment and maybe some shame.
So what do we do to change this? What do we do?
I think a lot of it comes down to educating folks and letting them know that really mental health issues are no different than any other kind of health issue. It's all a part of a larger picture. We don't stigmatize folks with diabetes, for instance, right? And really, with regard to the vast majority of mental health issues, it's a medical issue, right? There is a medical component to it. And therefore, it's no different than going in to get your insulin checked or changing your diet. And though the prescribed ways of dealing with mental health is a little bit different than that, really at the heart of it, folks need, I think if there's something they can walk away with today, is to realize that mental health issues are truly no different than any other kind of health issue.
Yeah, I think we need a much louder voice around these issues as we're talking about issues of gun control and mental health and safety and all of this. We really need a louder voice that says we have to do what we have to do as a society to protect ourselves and to protect each other, and we need to get over the nonsense.
Absolutely.
You know, just stop the silly stuff and get to what makes these things happen.
Well, I think venues like this, you know, the ability to speak out and to sort of become an activist are part of, I think, what helps combat stigma, both to the people they're talking to and also to the mental health consumer that's able to do that,
Right.
is able to take some action and feel some value and self-worth
Right.
by trying to defeat some of those things that are stigmatizing. And that, I think, has been very helpful for some of our families.
Right, right. Important stuff. You know what, we're going to go away for just a second, but we will be back in just a moment to talk about things you can do to help your loved ones through traumatic situations. Right. All right, stick with us. We'll be right back.